You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. This episode is brought to you by Kensington's newest title from Shelly Laurenston, Breaking Badger. Fans of Thea Harrison and Nalini Singh won't want to miss this exciting, funny, and sexy novel in the mega-popular Honey Badger Chronicles series. Now, I don't know about you, but I, for one, had never read a honey badger romance before this one, especially not one with a Siberian tiger shifter as the romantic interest. So this was a first for me. Finn Malone, Siberian tiger shifter, and honey badger shifter Mads Gallendaughter both appeared in previous books in the Honey Badger Chronicles, but this story casts them as the central couple amidst their kooky and dangerous friends. Breaking Badger is a wacky, violent, high-octane thrill ride from beginning to end, not to mention a high dose of snark and sass, two of my favorite qualities in a book and person. I highly recommend this book to anyone that loves zany characters, a fast-paced plot, and kick-ass women, plus the men who lust after them. And who doesn't want a fun, paranormal, spooky kind of read for the month of October? Am I right? You can find Breaking Badger along with the rest of the Honey Badger Chronicles series by Shelly Laurenston wherever books are sold. Find out more at kensingtonbooks.com. And now, back to the show. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and it is time for another Steamy Spotlight interview. I hope everybody has been enjoying our month of Hollywood hotness thus far, and even though we won't be doing a book review for today's episode, I can happily say that the book we will be talking about today definitely fits within the confines of Hollywood. A hashtag basic, hashtag millennial take on Hollywood, that is. My guest today is New York Times bestselling author Tessa Bailey, whose latest release, It Happened One Summer, is sure to give you all of the small-town, steamy summer vibes you've been craving. Tessa and I recently appeared on a virtual panel together at the Burbank Public Library alongside Lucy Score and librarian Jessica Buck. And I'll admit it was a little difficult to keep my fangirling to a minimum. Though she may not know it, Tessa is actually one of my one-click authors whom I've been reading since her very first book, circa 2013. Here to talk about romance, writing, and of course her brand new release, it's Tessa Bailey.
Hello, Kelly. It's so good to be here.
So good to see you again, like twice in a month.
Yeah, I mean we're basically
course.
married. And so in some states, I think that constitutes a union.
I mean, it's true. I've seen you via Zoom more often than I've seen some of my very best friends. So there you go.
It's a pandemic year. You're excused. I think we can all say that. We've been on Zooms way more often than we want to be.
It's true.
It's nice I think it's nice. Like I kind of feel like in the beginning of this pandemic, the Zooming was very overwhelming, and now I've really settled into it and started to almost prefer it.
Yeah, it's interesting how we had that time where it's like that's all anybody was doing, like whether it was, meetings, interviews, whatever it was. And then people got burnt out by Zoom and just kind of like stepped away from it. And then now we're kind of settling into like the happy medium.
I think you're right. Yeah. And I it just doesn't scare me anymore. I would really get worried, and I would get like sweaty, clammy palms before going onto a Zoom. And now it just kind of feels like second nature. So.
It's interesting because I think about it and I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to be like so present and visual like for Zoom. But at the same time, I feel like there's an understanding that the world now shares with each other of like, well, I haven't put on makeup in 18 months. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. Like, no, there's just like, you can be late. You can not look your best. You can wear sweatpants, and people all understand and don't seem to care, which I appreciate.
I do too. And you see a lot of people with like their dogs running around in the background, like newscasters or things. And you're like, yeah, and nobody even really talks about it anymore. Like in the beginning, that was like a blooper. And now if there isn't somebody with like a child running into the room in a diaper, it's weird, you know? Yeah, we've embraced the culture, the Zoom culture.
It's true. Well, and you live in New York, right?
Yes, I live on Long Island.
And so one of my favorite things that came early out in the pandemic was the Saturday Night Live episodes that they were doing at home. And one of my favorite things from that is the newscaster whose like kid is filming him and always turns on the filters, like the Snapchat filters, while he's reporting the news. And I'm just like, if that is not the most 2020 thing ever, I don't know what is.
There was a couple of times in the beginning where my daughter had to come in and like tell me how to take off certain filters. Like I was like, help me figure this out. But yeah, actually just last week I saw, I think it was a TikTok of a professor who did an entire test recap as a potato. Did you see that?
I saw it. Oh my gosh. Somebody sent it to me and I was like, what the hell is this? Because you're waiting. There's like this big intro music and then all of a sudden, potato face.
Potato. And he just like, and it's kind of genius. Like, I don't know if he pretended like it wasn't planned, because I guarantee those kids paid like 200% more attention to the potato face, you know, like than your boring old professor. So, yeah, genius move on his part.
And now he will always be the professor who went viral on TikTok as a potato, which, I mean, I bet he's going to have a lot of people signing up for his class next semester.
I want to sign up for it. I'm in. What class is it? I don't know.
Oh, gosh. Well, Tessa, like I mentioned, I have a very unique relationship with your books in that I'm pretty sure I actually did start with your very first book, Protecting What's His, which was book 1 in the Line of Duty series. And I had no idea until we did our panel together that was actually your first book.
Yeah, I didn't know that you were like a reader from the day. Like, I didn't know that. It was my first book. It wasn't the first book I had ever written, but it's the first one that ever got published. And it's weird. Like, I wrote a hockey book and submitted that to Entangled, who eventually became my first publisher. Mm-hmm. And I never heard back about it. And, you know, honestly, I think it could have been either one. It could have been either one they contacted me about. It ended up being this cop series.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. I just kept writing them. I just was like, I guess this is what I do now. I write about cops. Yeah. So, you know, those characters people still bring those characters up to me and kind of ask how they're doing. And there's something that's really nostalgic and just kind of like, I feel like I could crawl back into the skin of those characters and write them now, which is really, really cool. So I miss them sometimes.
I mean, it just shows how near and dear to your heart they are.
They are, especially Brent Mason, I would say. He's from Asking for Trouble. He's a character, like, I always am tempted to write another one of his types in a book. And it's funny, like, I can never write the same character twice. Like, as much as I want to like revisit him in a different skin or something, there's always some sort of difference. I think it's like my heart being like, nope, there's only one. Nope.
They're each their own snowflake.
Yes, exactly. Big, like, brash, dirty talking snowflakes.
I mean, hello. Like, come on. That's what's not great about that. But that is still one of my like go-to rereads as well, because and it's not even that it was like the beginning of my romance reading journey, because like I started reading romance in 2009, so there were a few years between, but it's that book, and it's Ginger and the sister relationship in it, and of course the dirty talking cop, but and who could forget, if you've read the book, Dolly Parton. I mean, she plays a pivotal role in the story. And so I don't know what it is that, you know, about that specific book, of all the books of yours that I've read, that has stood out to me and stood the test of time for so long. But if people haven't read it, I highly suggest that you do pick up a copy of Protecting What Is.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a really hard time moving on from that couple. I feel like they kind of grew with me. Mm-hmm. You know, like they were growing at the same time that I was learning how to be an author, because I didn't know anything about authoring. Like I wasn't in the romance community. I wasn't on romance Twitter, and I wasn't in like these Goodreads groups, and I had no kind of frame of reference for what I was doing.
Sure.
So I just wrote a book. I just wrote a story. And then like there was like a second storyline running through that of Willa's character and her boyfriend that she met. So there was like a new adult novel running together with this erotic adult novel. And like the editor Heather, who picked it up at Entangled, she was like, "Hi, you're a great writer. We need to talk. We really need to talk." She was like, "First of all, you can't have 4 different like stories happening in this one book. Like you need to separate it. Focus on the adult characters." She's like, "And also let's nail down your tropes." And I was like, "What's a trope?" I was like, "I don't even know what that is." So she kind of like had to teach me how to like plan, how to know what audience I'm appealing to, and like what word count I needed to like fit a certain category. And I just like didn't know anything. And I'm just really grateful for the people like along the way that helped me learn what I was doing and my, like how to craft a story correctly and fit a category and fit a niche. But I really feel like those characters of Derek and Ginger, like they were there with me through all of that. And I shaped their story at the same time I was kind of shaping this career that I have now. So I had a hard time letting them go. So I ended up carrying them over to like a different series, Crossing the Line series. And then Willa, the little sister, got her own book in Unfixable. And it was hard to move on from them. But I still think about them all the time. They're still fine. They're fine. They're living in Chicago. They've got like probably 2 kids now.
Oh, Chicago's my favorite too. Like that's probably the other reason I love that series, is that I lived for a couple years in Chicago and love it dearly. But yeah, it's interesting though that you mentioned sort of like coming into it blind, like, well, I just want to write the book. Like I just want to write these characters, because I feel like there's something refreshing about that too. Like I wonder if they would have had the same book had you come into it like knowing everything already, like, oh, I have to be thinking about this, I have to be thinking about this, like it might not have been the same story from the get-go.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think that's why still to this day, math 8 years later, 9 years later almost, I avoid, critique partners, and I avoid like my local RWA chapter, and I avoid being a part of any organizations like that, because I don't want anybody shaping the way I think and the way in terms of writing, like socially that's different. I think, like we need to be socially aware, and we need to pay attention to what people are saying. But when it comes to writing, like especially Twitter, when I'm on there, I see a lot of people talking about the way things should be and the way stories should be crafted and the way like things that should be included and shouldn't be. And I feel like then I'm starting to write for, who am I writing for?
Right.
I'm writing for kind of like this set of rules, and I don't like that. I just want to go into it with a blank slate every time. My heart knows what's right, I think, and what's wrong. And I just want to write an original story, and I don't want to have to think about, I guess, a set of parameters that has been set out. Yeah. So I think, like I've tried to stay true to that from the first book until now. It's just kind of going, okay, like let's just start. Let's not think about any expectations or anybody's kind of anybody else's way of writing. Let's just write our own book, So I really do try to do that every single time.
That's great. No, I think that's important. Well, and a lot of authors will speak to like writing the book that they want to read, or like I wrote this book for myself. Like, and I think that's important, because if you don't love what you're writing, or you don't want to read the story you're writing, I think it's a little, out there to think that, or have this expectation that like, well, I don't like it, but somebody else will. I think you're going to have a much better bet if you love this story and know that, well, somebody else will love this story too because I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, like, if it turns you on, it's going to turn someone else on. And that's not just like, the spicy parts of the book. It's, just like the romance part of it. Like, if it's speaking to your heart and it's making your chest hurt and you feel invested in the story, someone else is going to feel that way about it too.
Absolutely.
And I also want to, I'm not putting down critique partners or being a member of your local organizations. I think that's actually really positive for some people.
Sure.
But the way I work is like, if somebody even like remotely seems like they don't like my idea, I will drop it. Like the second I feel
totally
any kind
get
of
that
pushback. So I can't do it. Otherwise, nothing would ever get done.
I don't find it helpful either if and I teach online creative writing classes. And so I have these conversations with my students about providing critique and like valuable feedback and everything. And I also don't find it helpful when people just like praise every single thing too. Like, oh, this is great. It's amazing. Like I wouldn't change anything, like as you're in like outlining stages. I'm like, okay, like, right. Like I want something, but I also don't want everything, So, I mean, I totally get the whole idea though, to like keep things to yourself until the writing process is like already underway. And then you have something to share with them that's like concrete, like they can read something as opposed to just like an idea that maybe makes sense to you. But I mean, I can't articulate my ideas to everyone either. Like, nobody can see inside my head.
Yeah, it's such a fragile balance between taking criticism, but like also believing in your idea. You know? It's like I have, when you form a trust with an editor, it's so valuable because it's like when they start to know exactly what your limits are of criticism, and they find a way to tell you something without it sounding like a criticism. Wow, I'm just realizing as I'm saying this, like, oh wow, you have such a fragile ego.
They're like therapists. Like honestly, it's the same
really
thing with therapists.
Yeah.
It's like you have to find the right balance. Like, do you want to be coddled or do you want to like get a talking to?
Yeah, or like my editor kind of has a way of being like, oh wait, I don't understand this. Can you explain this to me? And then I'll be like talking it out and I'll be like, oh yeah, it doesn't make sense. Like, oh, that doesn't, like, I'm totally, this is not doing what I wanted it to do, or this plot point. So just her being like, can you talk this out to me? And then I'll kind of go, okay. And then I'll fix it with her not having to say what it was. I'll just figure it out for myself.
Yeah.
And so that's like her trusting me as well. So it's like a really good, like your editor is your teammate.
Yeah. Give and take. Good teamwork makes the dream work. There you go.
Exactly.
Well, so here we are 8 years later since the very first book, and you've published a little bit of everything from cop romance, we have teddy bear baker romance, we have home renovation romance, and as of 2020, vampire romance. So my question is, what attracts you or inspires you to write such a diverse lineup of stories?
Well, some of it has to do with just contractual, language. Like if I'm writing adult romance, adult full-length contemporary romance for Avon, as I do now, I can't self-publish something that's exactly like that because then I'm competing with them. Do you know what I mean? Like then my self-publishing books start competing with that. So I usually have to find something that's different, which is nice I think that's a really healthy exercise for a writer to go, okay, well, I can't write this thing I'm comfortable with. Like, what can I write? So I'll go, okay, well, I can write vampires. I can write, like a short single, standalone story. A new adult. I can write new adult. I can write lifeguards. So I feel like it's really good. It keeps you from like falling into a pattern with your writing. You're definitely stretching yourself and like exercising new muscles, and like it really. I think it's a good thing, and you can come back to contemporary with like a little bit of a new perspective and like fresh eyes. Yeah, vampires. I don't know. I was like, I'm such a mood person that, so I have this series called the Beach Kingdom series, which is these 3 lifeguard brothers. And I literally was at the beach with my daughter one day in Long Beach, right over here by our house. I watched a rescue take place. Like a lifeguard ran into the water and saved somebody, pulled them in during a rip current. And I was like, well, there's a series. Like, I guess I'm going to write. I was so, like, it was so, I don't know how to describe it. It was, like, harrowing, obviously, but it was also, like, this real-life event that was so, like, romantic in my head that I was like, oh, my God, that was so heroic. And then I just started writing stories. And so that, you know, like, it's a mood thing almost. And then the vampires, I just happened to remember that series, TV series, Pushing Daisies.
Oh.
And I thought I would love to write a story with that tone, that kind of like dark comedic, like dark comedy tone. And so I just had this idea to write a vampire series where the vampire falls for a mortician. And just because I wanted to write in that tone. So I'm a mood writer. I just really never know what it's going to be.
Well, I mean, I guess the follow-up then is there anything you're not willing to explore and or write?
I mean, no. I've always said that, like, historical, I feel like is out of my, it's just so, I mean, I read it. I know it's complicated. They do, like, some tough work writing those historicals. And I feel like it's people that maybe have a huge interest in the time periods that they're writing in. And I don't know if I have that level of interest in it. I just I like reading historical, like Kerrigan Byrne, and Sarah MacLean, and I mean, they're doing God's work. But I'm like, that's a lot of research. I don't know. I'm like, I just want to write in the current times.
Hey, nothing.
I know it.
Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. I think there's also, and I saw somebody, I know you're not keeping up on the Twitter, but I saw somebody on the Twitter recently, post something about sort of that whole idea of like, historical, there's so much research involved in historical, obviously, but there's a certain art to like contemporary writing as well, in that because we're so familiar with contemporary and like the world that exists around us, much more so than the average person is, knowledgeable about the Regency era or the Victorian era, that we're also quicker to like harshly judge books set in contemporary time periods, like unless they're like if something's off about them, And so I think there really is an art to writing contemporary romance. And I could see where some people might think of it as more challenging than writing historical.
Yeah, I think it does get, I think like as, I don't want to say like as you get older, because you're writing people in their 20s, and culture is fast and furious change. So it like, I do my best to, I try to do my best to like stay current, like I read the magazines I read when I was 20, and I follow I follow TikTok, and I follow new music, and I try and stay, abreast of like the current vernacular and things like that, because it's such a swift current of change that like you can easily sound like you could write a 28-year-old person that sounds like they're 35 real quick. Yeah. It really is like, you're right. There is kind of something that is difficult about it, and keeping it authentic.
Yeah.
Because times do change so quickly.
Do you ever think about writing, like whether it's a side effect of that whole idea or not, but do you ever think about writing like older characters, maybe in their 30s or 40s, like that are kind of like aging, it sounds so bad to say like they're aging as you age, but like we're all age. I mean, but I just know like as a 30-year-old at this point, like I'm much more inclined now to read a story about somebody in like the 28 to 35 range, as opposed to like the 20 to 23 range. So I'm wondering if it's the same for you as a writer.
It is. I feel like that's really starting to shift for me. Whereas like so I'm 37. And I feel like as I get older, not old, just older.
No.
37's not old.
No.
But like I feel like I'm more inclined to read about characters my age, and where I wouldn't have wanted to read a character who was 37 or 38 or even 40 when I was in my 20s. I just wouldn't have picked it up, you know? But now I'm like, I want to read about a 38-year-old woman falling in love. Hell yeah. Like, I want to read about her falling in love with a younger man, which is like a trope that never would have appealed to me, you know, like 10 years ago. But now it's like, that sounds like really good stuff. So it definitely is changing as I get older, and I'm starting to like things that I said I would never do or write seem to be opening up. Like those doors seem to be opening up. They don't seem to be as sealed, as tightly shut as they used to be. So yeah, like Piper was 30 and It Happened One Summer.
Yeah.
I want to say she was 29 or 30. And I definitely see myself sneaking towards closer to the 30s than I would say with the 20s.
Me
lately.
too. Well, perfect segue into today's, book discussion. And that is, we will be talking about Tessa's latest release, It Happened One Summer. It's available now. It's also the first book in a series, and the follow-up book, Hook, Line, and Sinker, will be out in March 2022, though it is available for pre-order at this time, so more on that later. But Tessa, we have something in common, and that is our shared love of Schitt's Creek, and the reason I bring that up is because It Happened One Summer is a Schitt's Creek-inspired romance, so I'd love if you could talk about how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, Schitt's Creek, I feel like it's so funny. It was on for several seasons before anybody like really picked up on the magic of it, and then it just exploded. And I watched it sort of towards the beginning of 2020, which we all know what happened. 2020, and it was like a comfort watch. Like I would turn it on and I would feel fine. I would feel like everything was going to be okay because they were like wrapping up these episodes with like a heartfelt moral message of just like acceptance and family and just optimism at the end of these 30-minute episodes. And I just fell in love with that show and the town that it was set in, and just just what it represents as just people loving each other. And I wanted to write something for Alexis Rose because, I don't think this is a spoiler when I say like, her romantic journey, maybe it is a spoiler.
You know what? If people haven't watched Schitt's Creek by this point, like this is on them for not knowing. Okay,
fine. So she falls in love with herself, I would say, like
I agree.
by the end of the series, and that was the point, I think, for her, and it was perfectly done. Oh, just beautiful. But I wanted to give her a romantic story because she was my favorite character. I love an underestimated woman. I love a woman who everybody counts out, and then she comes in and proves everybody wrong. So that's Piper for me, and It Happened One Summer. I took this pampered socialite who basically just gotten by on her looks her entire life, and I send her to a Pacific Northwest town called Westport with no money and just her younger sister in tow, who is like, they're just ride or die. Like they're best friends. They love each other to death. They want to do everything for each other, and make her fall in love with a sea captain who just wants he thinks he wants nothing to do with her. He just can't stop coming around to check up on her. Yeah, it's just a feel-good book.
Absolutely.
I wanted it to feel the way Schitt's Creek made me feel. That's kind of what it was.
Which was a very unique experience, like watching Schitt's Creek. And I think a lot of people have found a similar experience with Ted Lasso, which I haven't gotten to watch yet because I don't have Apple TV. So, but it was just a show that was so interesting in that it was so positive, and like people just existed in the bodies they existed in, like, black, white, gay, straight, like whoever you were, there were no questions asked. It was just like this beautiful small town full of acceptance and love. And I think that's what, especially during 2020, gave so many people comfort. And so I love that it inspired you enough to write a book that, took one of the characters and plucked them, you know, out of the socialite scene and put them into Westport, Washington, which, by the way, is a real place. So, and not that far from Portland, Oregon, where I am at this point. So I'm thinking a road trip might be in the near future.
Well, do you know what I'm doing? They invited me to come there and do a book signing. Did I tell you that?
No, but that was literally one of my questions, was if you had heard any response from the town of Westport.
Yes. So there's a Instagram account called Experience Westport, who originally got in contact with me, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, like this is great! You should come here. You should come to Westport." And I'm like, "Really?" And then I was just kind of like, I didn't really. I mean, I took it seriously, but I didn't really think it would ever come to any fruition. And then Westport Winery, which is featured in the book, they reached out to me and they were like, "Come do a book signing," and I was like, "Okay." I'm not gonna say no to a winery.
Yeah, like books and wine. Are you kidding? When is that happening? Do we have a date on that?
Well, I'm still talking to them, but the idea is to do it the week of Hook, Line, and Sinker's release, which is the follow up to what happened one summer. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be like the first week of March.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess I'll be there.
I guess so. I guess we're gonna meet in person. If the world's looking good at that point, I will absolutely fly there. I would die to go and see just like the real setting of the book, because you can only get so much of a feeling through like endless Google Earth searches and image searches and watching videos and things like that. Being there is different. Seeing the people and talking to people. And yeah.
Well, so since we're on the topic, let's talk about the small town of Westport, because as a longtime reader of your books and knowing, that you've lived in New York for a long time, that you don't often write small town romance. And so I'm wondering, what were some of the benefits and challenges of writing a small town, let alone a small town that's actually inspired by a real town?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a change. I do like writing in a city setting, but I moved to Long Island a few years back. I've kind of gotten used to the smaller town vibe. I'm not in a small town, I wouldn't say, but it's definitely smaller than Manhattan or Brooklyn, where I was before. So it's like, I've just started to kind of appreciate that, and it can be just as exciting. There can be just as much drama and places to go and things to do than you can have in a city. It's just kind of a different kind of excitement, and there is something really comforting about familiarity, I think, that readers like. So, and I like it as a reader. I like picking up a small town romance for sure. So, I thought I'd try writing it, and I did like having Piper interact with like Abe, like the local old man, and she started like walking him up the stairs of the museum so he could sit down, and then just like little things that endeared her to the town and endeared the town to her, and she probably wouldn't have had in a city. She never would have had those things. So it just like I hope I did it justice, like that small town feeling that so many people so many authors achieve,
So much so that you were invited to come to Westport. So I feel like I feel like they were pleased with the representation of their city.
I hope so. I hope they had read it all the way through. I'm like, I don't know if they realized how much like SEX was in it when they reached out to me, but we'll see.
I love it. No, I mean, it's interesting that, when we first meet Piper, she is very much the Instagram socialite, spending daddy's money, although it's stepdaddy in this book. And she's all about image and social media, and I think that's such a major part of our lives in general today, especially authors and podcasters and bloggers. Like social media is like this double-edged sword of like it's both a dependable tool when it comes to marketing your brand, but also that there's such a dark side to it in making it like so accessible towards everybody. And I really liked that when we first meet Piper, she's going through a breakup, and it's not a spoiler. I mean, this happens on like page 1, but it's so public. Like everything is public. It's on social media in a couple minutes what's happened. But like she can go to this small town where everybody knows everybody's business by word of mouth, and they're just so much more caring and considerate than, obviously all these strangers on the internet who have something to say about everybody, even if they don't know you. And it's just a really nice, subtle commentary, I think, on what social media is and like what it can be, both in the positive and negative sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a double-edged sword. It helps us stay connected.
Right.
It's a good way of getting certain messages out that are really important. But then, you start to kind of validate yourself through the strangers liking your pictures, strangers liking your posts, and you kind of lose sight of like what's around you, And so Piper, she goes to Westport, and she kind of has to rely on like herself in real life, like people aren't talking to her through a screen. They're not seeing one snapshot of her and judging her based on that. They're like judging her based on her actions, what she says, what she does, and she's not getting credit for it on the internet, it kind of opens her eyes up to like why she's really on these social media platforms and why she relies on them so heavily for approval. When this approval from this one little old man, or this makes hot surly sea captain, or like all these different people she meets, validation from them feels so much more realistic and so much more
authentic.
It feels authentic, and it just feels more valuable. So
yeah, I agree. I recently watched Bo Burnham's special Inside on Netflix, and there's that song White Woman's Instagram, which I like, as I was reading this, I'm like, oh, yep, there it is. She is like the quintessential white woman's Instagram, which if you haven't seen it, Tessa, you absolutely need to go watch. Like, even if you just watch that one, they have a music video for it on YouTube. Like so good. The whole special is fantastic.
I love Bo Burnham. I haven't seen the current special, but I watched the one before it, and it's always kind of crazy. Like it's good, I think, to watch these stand-up specials from certain people, because like you do get called out, and in a way that's like, okay, yeah, that's right.
Oh, for sure.
I am like that.
I feel it. Me too.
I do. And it kind of makes you a little more self-aware. That doesn't hurt anybody, to become a little bit more self-aware of what you're doing and how other people perceive it. And, and if it's hurtful, or if sometimes you just don't consider things like that. So I think it behooves us to like listen to sometimes. This, especially Bo Burnham, he seems to really, I watched this Bill Burr special, and I realized he's very controversial. He was controversial on Saturday Night Live, but he kind of called out white women as well. And I was going, Jesus, like that really, it made me pay attention. It made me really think about my actions and things.
Here's the difference between like Bill Burr and Bo Burnham, in that I saw the Saturday Night Live that Bill Burr did host, and there were moments that I chuckled at, but a lot of it, I didn't take a lot of stake in, because I feel like he calls out everybody else except himself. Whereas with Bo Burnham, like everybody is fair. Like he talks about like, oh my gosh, I'm a white man with privilege. Like he has a song that's called like, what is it? It's like White Male Tears or something. And it's all about all the things that like are so hard for him because he's a white man. But he does it with such like self-awareness and self-deprecation that you're like, that he's including himself on the population that's being made fun of. And so I love how he's so aware of who his comedy is hitting, because 9 out of 10 times it's also hitting him. And so that's what makes me appreciate his comedy more. It just seems like a lot more aware and current. And so that's what I love about him. And this special is very different from his other stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, you will laugh for sure. But this is also a product, just like you wrote this book in 2020 as like a cure all for the feelings and emotions that everyone was experiencing in 2020. He made this special inside his house by himself, written, directed, produced, all of it, just him. And it's sort of like the toll that it takes on his mental health and like how he's experiencing depression and anxiety during 2020. And so, I mean, there are funny moments like White Woman's Instagram, but there are also much darker moments. And it's a roller coaster ride for sure. But yeah, I really appreciated it.
Cool. I'll check it out. Yeah, I follow him on Instagram. And so I know the concept behind it. And I realize that he did it like inside.
Yeah.
Isn't it called Inside?
Yeah.
Is it called Inside? Okay. Yeah. And I kind of like watched, I feel like I was seeing the process as it was happening, but haven't watched the final product yet. But I stood behind him once at a Barnes & Noble.
Ooh.
But my friend Shannon actually pointed, she goes, "Is that Bo Burnham?" And I was like, "I think that's Bo Burnham."
Is he tall?
It was
Is he
a long
just
time
as
ago.
tall as I picture him?
Yes, this was a long, long time ago, though. This was probably, I want to say this is, like he was probably just kind of coming up through the comedic ranks. But
wow, that's awesome. I saw him live. It would have been like 5 or 6 years ago when I saw him on stage. It was for his What special. I saw him live, and he was great. Just as good live as he is on camera. So there you go. One more thing to check out. It's definitely not the same vibes as It Happened One Summer or Schitt's Creek, but it'll make you think. Oh gosh.
Well, there's room for everything, right? You know, like there's room for everything. You know, like I think that's part of like, like stepping outside of yourself sometimes is like, like Bill Burr is more abrasive, but like it does, like different things can make you think,
right.
Even if you don't like them or something,
Well, and it's just nice to see all the different things that have come out of 2020. Like we've seen so many different pieces of art and movies and books that have come out of 2020 and authors specifically acknowledging, like in their author notes, like I found solace watching TikTok, so much so that I based a book off of this male model on TikTok, or I watched a lot of Schitt's Creek and I wondered, when does Alexis get her love story? So I mean, it really is interesting to see just sort of like what people did with that year where we all basically put our lives on pause, and because I think these are pieces of art that are going to be very monumental, like moving forward. Like this is history. This is a piece of time that not everybody, 30 years from now is going to say that they got to experience.
I mean, I think about it all the time, just like the fact that so many, like not only people created art during this period, but like people moved, people moved to places they never would have moved to, and they're going to meet different people that they would have met, and lives are going to be changed. Like the whole course of history like a house of cards, like cards just got thrown up into the air and landed on all different places. And so now we have all these intertwining stories that, like these paths that are converging on each other and different lives, like affecting other people's lives. And it's going to be crazy to think about, like in 10 years when people are talking about what their life would have been like if this pandemic had never happened. And
it's true.
I think that there's going to be art coming out of this for decades to come.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I don't think we've seen the full effect of it yet. I think there's still like stories unfolding because of this that will be unfolding for a long time.
It's a nice positive spin on like what, is clearly like a low point in, our global history. Not even like, I can't even say just our country's history. Like this is a global effect. Yeah. But well, anyway, that's a lot, but still important.
Just so deep.
We'll lighten it up a little bit, and I'll take you back to Piper, and ask, Piper's obviously inspired by Alexis Rose. On top of that, in the book, Piper inherits, if you will, a small bar in a small town, much like we see the Rose family inherit the small town of Schitt's Creek in the series. So I'm wondering, are there any other Schitt's Creek isms that can be found within the book?
I mean, not really, like I didn't want to like take, I didn't want to take any of the concept of Schitt's Creek really. And it was really just a matter of like taking a character,
Mm-hmm.
kind of, you know, like a lot of characteristics of a certain character, Alexis Rose, and kind of putting her into a landscape that I created.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of, you know, except for like the quirky townspeople
And the
things
heart
like that.
and the feeling.
And the heart of
yeah.
it. Yeah. There isn't necessarily any other Schitt's Creek Easter eggs. Although, like, I kind of regret not putting some in now. Like, because a couple of people have asked me, they're like, "What other Schitt's Creek Easter eggs are in there?" And I'm like, I didn't put any of them.
People will find the Schitt's Creek Easter eggs if they want to find them, whether they're intentional or not. I mean, we've talked about Piper a bunch, so I think it's only fair we mention Brendan, our grumpy but hunky fisherman, and I think. You know, I think you mentioned it to me during the panel that a lot of people have kind of like compared him to Mutt from Schitt's Creek. And I think that's just wishful thinking on their part because they wanted Team Mutt versus Team Ted. But you mentioned earlier that you never write the same character twice. Like as much as you want to, they're unique, sexy, dirty talking snowflakes. And so I'm wondering, where did the storyline for Brendan come from?
He's not like Mutt to me. I will say that. I don't think he comes across like Mutt.
I don't think he does either.
Because like, I don't know. I'm hoping I'm not in the minority here when I say that Mutt was like really exciting in those chapters when they were kind of like dancing around each other, or those episodes where they were like kind of, you know, he was dating somebody else and she liked him from afar and he was like very exciting. And then like it lost the magic for me when they finally got together.
Well, and it did for them too.
Yeah. It just kind of like fell flat. I don't know how to just, it might have just been that he shaved his beard. I don't know. Am I superficial? I don't know. Maybe I am. Brendan kind of, I don't know where he came from. He just kind of like, I think I've been saying, like, you know, I said he's like a metaphor, kind of like, a personification of the ocean.
Yeah.
He's just the steady, dependable, like you can set your watch on him. He's always going to be there. He's always going to show up at the right time. You know, like he's eternal. He's this man who kind of he's made his living on the ocean. He's a throwback to men who work with their hands, men who make their living from the sea. And he's completely foreign to Piper, who's kind of like been dating these men who are like her in a way. They're like the male versions of her that they live and die based on how many social media followers they have, and they are always trying to find the new exciting thing that's going to make them appear new and exciting to other people.
Right.
And Brendan doesn't give a shit about any of that. He doesn't have an Instagram. He doesn't care what anybody thinks of him. He's there to like support the men in his crew. He's there to provide food and sustenance to the village, which is such like an old concept.
It is. I mean, you talk about not writing historical romance, but I will say there is something like romantically historical about Brendan's character. Like he almost feels like a man that you could have plucked out of a different point in time and like put into this contemporary romance.
Yeah, I agree. Like he doesn't feel like a modern man. He feels like, you know, he just has these really kind of, he's old fashioned mannerisms and a way of looking at things that is really refreshing. I just think not only to Piper, but just to me as a reader or a writer, just like, I like writing about a man who doesn't worry about the things that I worry about, you know, like who just is like kind of only concerned with like the basic human needs. And that's all he wants. He wants you to be happy and he wants to do his job and do it well and like not let anybody down and just be dependable. And just like, there's something that's so romantic and like,
oh yeah,
it's so easy.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what it is too. Is it's easy, and I think, you know, speaking as a single woman who dating is just like, I mean, it's so complicated. Like I feel like when it's not complicated, then I almost have this feeling of needing to complicate it because simple is like, this can't be right. Like something's wrong with it being simple. I'm missing something. I'm waiting for like the other shoe to drop. And in this case, that's not it. He just is very much a man who does and says exactly what he means. And isn't that nice? It's definitely not one. I gotta go to Westport. I go to Westport, Washington, and find me a sea captain. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I think that's what I take away from listening to people talk about dating these days, and maybe even just like my past experience as well, is that you're always trying to hunt through a man's head these days to figure out what are you thinking, and like, what do you want to do? And like, what do you want from me? And what do you think about me? And like, what do we think about each other? Like, you're just constantly trying to get this, like,
we want to know all the answers. We want to know everything.
Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Like, stop making me hunt for it. And so it's really refreshing when like a man is just like, well, I want to date you. And like, this is what we're doing. And I like you. And I don't want you to go back to LA. And just, like, this is what's important to me, and this is what and I just think it's so nice to have an open book in a male character like that, because it's so rare in real life.
I know. Where is he? Like, this isn't fair. But no, I'm with you. It's just, and I know in real life, as I think about that, it's more of like me tackling my own insecurities. And I think women are set up from a very early age to be like competitive with one another. Whether it comes to, beauty standards or competing for like a men's attention. And so, but in reality, I mean, some of my favorite TikTok videos are watching the ones where men are just like, ladies, if you think we're worried about these things, guess what? We're not. And it's
we don't care if you have Shelly Laurenston.
Yeah, exactly.
That is really refreshing. I love that.
I love it.
More of that. Why don't you just say it to our faces instead of doing it on TikTok?
That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Can you imagine if we lived in a world where everybody said exactly what was on their mind, like, all the time? I mean, I'm sure parts of it would be very negative, but at the same time, it would solve a lot of problems. Like, there would just be you could just tell somebody, I'm not interested. Oh, great. Done. We're done. That's awesome. I can move on.
Yeah, it would save you having to like overanalyze every conversation you have every single time for days. Like, if you just knew exactly what everybody thought.
Someday.
It would save some time.
Maybe we'll get there. But anyway. Well, and I guess it goes without saying that if anybody has read a Tessa Bailey book, they know that illustrated cover or not, there's going to be some steam. And so I'm wondering, what is your process when it comes to writing the steamier scenes in a romance? I know that I've talked to authors who start with steamy scenes. I know that there's some people who dread writing steamy scenes. So I'm wondering, what's it like for you?
I definitely don't. I love writing them. I love it. I feel like sometimes I'm racing towards them, and I'm kind of like, I'm thinking about how I want it to go down. But I have to write them in order of the story, because I really feel like, where they're at in their relationship, or how it's progressing plays a huge role in like how it ends up going, how it ends up playing out, like, are they still dancing around each other? Is this a big dramatic romantic moment? Does she feel vulnerable? Does he feel like she's misreading him? Like, there is a lot that goes into it. It just depends on like where they are at that exact moment in the story.
Right.
For me. So I can't write it ahead of time. It's got to be like real organic, really in the moment stuff. I really like it to, if I can, yes, they're very steamy, and they're, like we were just talking about the male filter being gone, and they are gone in these scenes. I like it. I just love that wall coming down, total honesty. Yeah. I love the woman wanting to be objectified and the man giving her what she wants.
Love it.
Yeah. And I just, I want to find a way to move the romantic plot forward in those scenes if I can, like, I don't want them to be just about a hookup. I want it to be, one of them reveals something to each other in one of those in one of those moments of passion. If something comes out that's going to come up later, or maybe she admits something or he admits something, while his filter's gone, that just kind of like reveals something to the other character, and then it changes the way they feel about each other afterwards. And I really like, that's really what the goal is.
Yeah, vulnerabilities. I like to see that a lot I think that the steamier sex scenes, like that's what they have like the power to do, is bring out true honesty, vulnerabilities like between the characters. And that's what I like to see, because that's when I look beyond like just the sex and see the romance and the intimacy and the love connection.
Yes. I think vulnerability in each character, that's kind of like when I'm creating characters, their vulnerability is one of the things I work on the hardest. Because I think it not only relates the characters to each other, but just it relates them to the reader. Like when I'm reading a character, their vulnerability is kind of that's that conduit from me to them. Because I'm not like, I don't necessarily relate to every single character. I can't relate necessarily to every single character I read, but if they have some like an insecurity that I even remotely share or have shared in the past with them, I can put myself in their shoes. So it's something I definitely work the hardest on. And during those steamy scenes, like yes, there's a lot of revealing of those chinks in the armor.
Yeah. Well, looking ahead at the next book in the series, which obviously we're going to celebrate the release of in Westport, Washington, in March of 2022, what can we expect? I mean, I already know, and I think anybody who's read the book knows whose romance this is going to be, but can you give us any inside look at the next book?
Yeah, so it's a Fox and Hannah. Fox is Brendan, his kind of like first mate, I would say. Mm-hmm. They call him he's a relief skipper, is what they would call him on the boat. But he is kind of like he's the town playboy. He's a womanizer. And then he meets Hannah, and he just loves her. I don't know how to describe it. He just like loves Hannah so much. And she is his first female friend. She's the first woman who's ever kind of not wanted to pursue him in any way except like to be his buddy. And they become really close. They spend 6 months texting and becoming really close friends. And then she has to go back to Westport to film. She's on a production team for a movie. So they're there to film a movie in Westport. And she can't stay with Piper because Piper's, future in-laws are there, mm-hmm. Staying in Piper's guest room. So she has to stay with Fox in his apartment on the harbor. And, there's forced proximity. It's friends to lovers. It deals a lot with kind of like toxic masculinity, which I kind of didn't see coming, because he's kind of had this like, I don't know, like this like weight put on his shoulders from a very young age of like, oh, you're going to be a lady killer, like, oh, the girls are going to love you. And like from an age that it wasn't even appropriate yet,
right.
Like, how we do that to children and we shouldn't.
Yeah. When we're like asking 5-year-olds if they have girlfriends.
Yeah. Do you have a girlfriend? Yeah.
Stop it.
He's told a lot of that. So he's got that. He's like kind of carrying with him that's sort of shaded his behavior, I'd say, throughout adulthood. And Hannah just kind of like, she comes into her own in the book too. There's a sea shanty I wrote in there. So you're gonna love it. It's really, it's crazy to me that people are already reading it because like the arcs went out.
Yeah, I just got one on NetGalley, so I'm excited. My thing is I want to dive in immediately, but at the same time I'm like, oh no, it's not out for so many months. Like, don't do it yet because you're just gonna want to talk about that book, and like we still have so many months in between, and there's other books. Like, oh, NetGalley, what are you doing to me?
I know. It really became available like 2 weeks after it happened one summer, and I was like, guys, I can't write this fast.
They knew. They're like, everybody's gonna want to read this one immediately after. Our greedy hearts, and I don't even feel guilty. I don't even feel guilty about it, but it's so true. I'm excited. Well, and then I'm wondering, do you have plans to write more books in this series, or was it always intended to be a 2-book series?
I always intended it to be 2 books, and that's going to be it. So I don't know why. I think I just kind of like, I'm so easily distracted. I'm always wanting to move on to something.
Sure.
And like, I'm like, shiny, that's shiny. I'm like, I think that a lot of authors deal with that. That I started getting impatient by the time I hit the third book in a series. So I was like, why don't I just not write 3 books? Why don't I write 2? And like, I feel like it was a really good thing because I poured my heart and soul. I was able to just give everything to these 2 books.
Yes.
Without feeling the pressure of that third book. And I feel like it just was a really good move for me. But I already have another series planned with Avon.
Tell me more.
Well, we're going to Napa Valley, so I can tell you that much.
I've got 0 complaints about that. We're just trading wineries.
I'm just going to stick with the wine. I'm going to stick with the wine theme.
Yeah. You could just do a tour down the West Coast. Just go Washington. Now we're hitting up Napa. Then you have to go into like, let me think where you go in SoCal. It's like, maybe like,
well, I'm from San Diego originally.
Okay, I was thinking like Ojai, but yeah, like somewhere, because they've got some great wineries down in, or Temecula, like some great wineries down there.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And also, yes, I'm from Carlsbad, which is like a real beachy, small beachy town. And I'm like, I can't do that for a couple series because I just did a small waterside town. I almost pitched them a series that was like in Martha's Vineyard. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, you're just doing the same.
We're just taking it to the East Coast.
Same town. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I'm really excited about it. It's the first book is going to be about a woman who is writing love letters to her this man she's been in love with since childhood. So it's going to be
great.
Yeah.
Love letters in Napa Valley. Sign me up.
Right? It sounds really swoony.
Yeah.
Swoony and like atmospheric. So I'm looking forward to writing it.
Well, and then maybe it's too much to think about now since you obviously have so much on your plate, but I'm always curious about whether or not authors have a dream project, the story that you're dying to write that's just sort of like lurking around your brain.
Sure. Yeah.
As if there's just one of them. Like, let's be honest.
I have see, it's one of those things where it's a dream project in my head, but I don't know if it would translate onto paper until I actually sat down and started to write it. I don't know. But I have this like time travel book in my head, that it's always kind of sat there.
Okay.
And I don't know, like maybe someday, like this girl kind of goes back in time to save the boyfriend that she couldn't save. Like he did something heroic, like ran into a building to save somebody and never came out. And now she's going back in time to like solve it and save him. And I've always had that in my head, but I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I would pick up a time travel book. So
why not?
I do love Karen Marie Moning has that time travel Highlander series that I like still think about those books and I love those books.
Oh my gosh. Let me tell you, we read one of those for the podcast and it was, and I picked up like the 4th or 5th book in the series. Like I did not start at the beginning. It was one of the most wild things I've ever read. Like not in like a negative way, not in a positive way. It was just wild. Like, I mean, at one point this Scottish Highlander dude is like trapped in a mirror and I'm just like, what the fuck is going on?
I forgot about that until you just said it.
Oh my gosh.
Dagus and like the other one.
Yes.
And they all are just these complicated alpha males with these dark pasts.
Yes.
You're like, it's so addictive. And then the heroines are so interesting and like loyal, and that's the kind of thing I like to read. But yeah, it's always been in the back of my head. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to write it, but
I hope you do.
Why not?
I hope you do get the chance to write it and you just go for it. And you know what? Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe, but I mean, you won't know until you, try to put it on the page. But,
yeah, that's true.
I'm excited. I would love to read Tessa Bailey time travel romance.
Hey, I mean, now that I put it out to the universe,
I
mean, like, I feel like I have to do something about it. So.
Manifest. It's so true. Yeah. Well, Tessa, where can everybody find and follow you and keep up with, what you've got coming up on your plate here?
Follow me on Instagram at Tessa Bailey is an author. I'm at author Tessa Bailey on TikTok, which I'm having a lot of fun on TikTok these days. And exploring my acting side. I don't know what I'm doing. And also tessabailey.com if you want to like join my newsletter or see what's out, and all the different series are on there. So yeah.
And obviously we can all meet you in person in Westport, Washington next year.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. I should have some news about that soon. I have to like reach back out to them and be like, are you guys going to sell tickets, or are we just going to like put this out and I just show up and see what happens?
Everybody gets a couple tickets for wine. That would be so much fun. And I really, really do hope this happens, because I'm like 2.5 hours away. I know I'm going to be there, whether or not you're there. I'll be there.
Okay, deal.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I guess I'll meet you in Westport.
I'll meet you in Westport. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.